Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing you own 10,000 acres of America, no neighbors for miles, a private lake, hundreds of cattle scattered across the horizon, cowboys riding through the morning fog, a long gravel driveway leading to a house where your coffee is waiting on the porch. It sounds like freedom. It looks like wealth. And if you've ever watched a ranch movie or scrolled through luxury ranch listings, you already know the fantasy. Buy the land, buy the cattle, let the animals graze, sell them, watch the property appreciate, and eventually you've built a fortune. But there is one problem. Almost everything you've just imagined leaves out the expensive part. The well pump that suddenly dies, the fence that gets destroyed by a flood, the tractor that breaks during calving season, the hay bill that arrives just as cattle prices collapse, the drought that turns thousands of acres of grass into brown dirt. And the most brutal part? You can own millions of dollars worth of land and still lose money every year. Because ranching isn't really a story about cattle, it's a story about land, debt, weather, taxes, cash flow, and surviving long enough for the land to become valuable. So today, we're going inside the economics of an American ranch, not the movie version, the real version. And by the end, you'll understand why some ranchers struggle for decades, while billionaires keep buying more land. Because the answer to whether a ranch can make you rich is surprisingly simple. Yes, but probably not in the way you think.
Before we talk about money, we need to answer a basic question. What exactly is a ranch? Because ranch can mean completely different businesses. A cattle ranch raises beef animals. A sheep ranch raises sheep for meat or wool. A horse ranch breeds, trains, or boards horses. A bison ranch produces specialty meat. A hunting ranch monetizes wildlife. A guest ranch sells an experience, trail rides, campfires, cabins, cowboy culture. And then there is the luxury recreational ranch, a property that may produce very little agricultural income at all. Its real products might be privacy, recreation, tax advantages, and long-term appreciation. These businesses can look almost identical from the outside. A giant piece of land, some fences, a few animals, maybe a barn. But financially, they're completely different. A luxury guest ranch can function like a hotel. A hunting ranch can function like a private outdoor resort. A cattle ranch is closer to a commodity business. You raise an animal whose selling price you don't control, using land whose costs you do control, while depending on weather you absolutely cannot control. And that's why we're going to focus primarily on the traditional cattle operation, because this is the ranch most people imagine when they picture the American West, and it's also where the economics get interesting.
Let's start with the biggest number, the land. According to the figures in the original source, the national average value of pasture land was around $1,920 per acre in 2025. But that number can be dangerously misleading, because America doesn't have one ranch market, it has hundreds. In some parts of Wyoming and the far west, land can sell for around $1,000 per acre or less. In parts of Texas, prices can rise dramatically. And around places like Austin in the Hill Country, premium ranch properties can reach thousands or tens of thousands of dollars per acre. Colorado's Front Range can be even more extreme. Why? Because eventually, you're no longer paying for grass, you're paying for location, views, privacy, development potential, and proximity to wealthy buyers. This creates one of the most important rules in ranch economics. The agricultural value of land and the market value of land are not necessarily the same thing. Imagine you want a serious cattle operation, say 500 cows. In dry country, one cow might require 20 to 30 acres. Suddenly, 500 cows could require 10,000 to 15,000 acres. At $1,000 an acre, you're already looking at $10 million to $15 million just for dirt. No cattle, no tractors, no fences, no barns, no water system, nothing. And this is where a beginner sees an apparent bargain. Only $1,000 an acre? But cheap land usually comes with a reason: sparse grass, long winters, longer distances, less water, higher transportation costs, more hay, more infrastructure. The land is cheaper because the land produces less. Meanwhile, expensive land in a region with better grass, longer growing seasons, stronger infrastructure, and closer markets can sometimes cost much more per acre, while costing less to operate per animal. And that leads to the first major lesson. Never ask only, how much does the ranch cost? Ask, how much does it cost to make each animal profitable on this ranch? Those are two completely different questions.
Let's say you buy the land. Congratulations! You now own a very expensive piece of dirt, but you don't necessarily own a functioning ranch because the property needs infrastructure. And infrastructure is where the fantasy starts getting expensive. Start with fencing. A standard 5-strand barbed wire fence can cost thousands of dollars per mile to install. Now imagine a massive ranch with dozens of miles of perimeter fencing. And you're not finished. You need interior fencing. Why? Because cattle can't simply wander across 10,000 acres indefinitely. You need pastures, gates, rotation, controlled grazing. You might spend hundreds of thousands of dollars before your first herd arrives. Then comes water, and water is everything. A cow can survive a lot. A cow cannot survive without water. In much of the American West, water infrastructure means wells, pumps, electricity, solar systems, storage tanks, pipelines, and troughs spread across enormous distances. A single well may not be enough. A pump can fail. A pipeline can break. A water tank can freeze. And when the cattle are standing in the middle of nowhere waiting for water, you don't get to say, "I'll fix it next week." You fix it now. Then come the working facilities, corrals, chutes, loading systems, sorting pens, veterinary equipment. A hydraulic squeeze chute alone can cost thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the setup. And then you need storage, hay storage, equipment storage, fuel, tools, parts, housing, roads. A ranch is basically a small industrial facility spread across thousands of acres, except the factory floor is grass and the factory workers have 4 legs. By the time you add fencing, water, corrals, roads, storage, housing, and other infrastructure, a raw property can require hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially more than $1 million before it becomes fully operational. And none of that infrastructure directly produces a calf. It's simply the cost of being able to raise one.
Finally, we get to the part everyone thinks is the business, the cattle. A commercial-bred cow can cost several $1,000s depending on the market. Now, imagine building a 500-cow herd. You're suddenly spending roughly $1 million or more just assembling the herd. And then you need bulls. One bull might cover roughly 25 to 30 cows, so 500 cows could require somewhere around 17 to 20 bulls. A basic commercial bull might cost several $1,000s. A high-quality bull with strong genetics can cost tens of thousands. And genetics matter because the bull determines a huge portion of what those future calves become. Better growth, better carcass quality, better feed efficiency, better market value. A small difference per animal doesn't sound dramatic, but multiply that difference across hundreds of calves, and suddenly genetics become a major part of the business. But cattle aren't machines. They get sick, they get injured, they escape, they die. A $35,000 bull doesn't come with a warranty. Your inventory breathes, it eats, it reproduces, it gets sick, and sometimes it decides to walk through a fence you spent $10,000 building. That's the difference between owning a warehouse full of inventory and owning livestock. Your inventory can literally destroy the warehouse.
Then comes the machinery, and this is where many new owners make an expensive mistake. They want everything new. 2 tractors, heavy-duty trucks, a livestock trailer, a hay baler, a utility vehicle, a loader, fuel equipment, and suddenly the ranch has another 6-figure equipment bill. A new utility tractor can easily run tens of thousands of dollars. A heavy-duty ranch truck can cost tens of thousands more.
A livestock trailer can add another significant expense, and a hay baler can cost tens of thousands by itself. But the real cost isn't just the purchase price. It's financing, insurance, fuel, maintenance, repairs, depreciation. If you finance $200,000 worth of equipment, the payments can become a significant annual expense before you've sold a single calf. And here's the rule experienced ranchers understand. The best equipment isn't necessarily the newest equipment. It's the equipment appropriate for the size of the operation. If you have 200 cows, you don't necessarily need the machinery required by a 1,000-cow operation, because every piece of unnecessary equipment becomes another payment, another repair, another insurance bill, another reason your margins disappear. And ranching already has a margin problem, which brings us to the biggest structural problem of all: cash flow.
Ranching has a strange financial rhythm. Your expenses happen every day, your revenue happens seasonally. The cattle eat today, the fuel gets burned today, the veterinarian gets paid today, the employee gets paid this week, the fence breaks today, but your major cattle revenue, that may come months later. This is one of the most dangerous parts of the business because you can be asset rich and cash poor. According to the figures used in the source material, cow-calf production costs can exceed $1,000 per cow annually, depending on region and conditions. Now multiply that by 500 cows. You're talking about roughly $500,000 or more in annual costs before even considering the enormous cost of land and major debt obligations. And feed is often the largest variable. When grass is abundant, cattle graze. It feels almost magical. The land feeds the animal. But when winter comes or drought hits, the magic ends. You buy hay. And suddenly your biggest expense is no longer theoretical. It's sitting in a field waiting for the tractor. Consider 500 cows through a long winter. Thousands upon thousands of dollars in feed can disappear from the bank account before spring. Then add veterinarian expenses, vaccinations, pregnancy testing, deworming, emergency treatment, calf problems, injuries, then labor. A serious ranch isn't a weekend hobby. Someone needs to check the cattle, fix the fence, feed animals, operate machinery, move cattle, handle calving, maintain water, repair equipment, deal with emergencies. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And finding experienced ranch labor can be difficult because the job is physically demanding and often takes place in remote locations. So the ranch becomes what it really is: a business with payroll, a business with utilities, a business with maintenance, a business with inventory, a business with unpredictable revenue. And now we get to the question everyone actually wants answered: how much money does it make?
The revenue model sounds incredibly simple. A cow gets pregnant, she has a calf, the calf grows, you sell the calf. That's it. Suppose you have 500 cows. A strong operation might produce roughly 450 saleable calves from that herd in a good year. Let's use an average sale value of around $2,200 per calf for the example. 450 calves times $2,200. That's approximately $990,000, almost $1 million. Sounds fantastic, until you remember what we just discussed. That $1 million isn't profit, it's revenue. And against that revenue are feed costs, labor, veterinary costs, fuel, equipment, insurance, property expenses, repairs, overhead, debt, and potentially enormous land costs. A well-run operation might generate a relatively small operating profit in a strong cattle market. In a bad year, it can lose money. This is the dirty secret. A ranch can generate $1 million in revenue and still not make its owner rich. In fact, the return on the underlying land can be remarkably low if you judge the ranch purely as an agricultural business. Imagine investing $10 million into land and generating only tens of thousands of dollars in annual agricultural profit. The percentage doesn't look impressive. That's because it isn't. If you bought a ranch expecting the cattle alone to generate a spectacular return on your capital, you may have bought the wrong asset. And then something happens that makes the entire calculation even more dangerous. the weather changes.
Imagine two ranchers, same number of cows, same land, same equipment, same employees, same business plan. One gets rain, the other gets drought. By the end of the year, they can have completely different financial results. In a drought, grass stops growing. Hay season arrives early, but everyone else needs hay too. So demand rises, supply falls, prices increase. The rancher has two choices: buy expensive feed or sell cattle. Selling sounds reasonable. Fewer cows means fewer mouths to feed, but there's a hidden cost. Those cows are your production capacity. You just sold the machines that produce your future revenue. And then comes the cruel part. When the drought ends, everyone wants to rebuild their herds. Replacement cattle become expensive. So the rancher who sold during the drought may later have to buy back animals at much higher prices. This is why drought can damage a ranch for years after the rain returns. And then there's the cattle cycle itself. Prices rise, ranchers make money, they expand. More calves enter the market, supply increases, prices eventually fall. Ranchers cut herds, supply tightens, prices rise again. The cycle repeats. So your revenue depends on two variables you don't control: the weather and the market. And sometimes they go against you at the exact same time. That's when a ranch can become a financial nightmare.
Now we reach the strangest part. If cattle ranching is such a thin margin business, why do billionaires keep buying ranches? People like Ted Turner, John Malone, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Stan Kroenke. These aren't people who need to make an extra $50,000 selling calves. So why buy thousands or even millions of acres? Because they're often not buying the cattle business, they're buying the land. And the land has advantages that the cattle don't. Privacy. Imagine owning tens of thousands of acres. You don't simply own a house, you own distance. You own isolation. You own a private world. Then there's appreciation. Land is finite. They aren't manufacturing another 10,000 acres of Texas Hill Country tomorrow. And in desirable regions, wealthy buyers can push land prices far beyond what agricultural production alone would justify. Then there are tax considerations. In some states, agricultural use can qualify land for favorable property tax treatment, and conservation easements can potentially create significant tax benefits for qualifying landowners who permanently restrict development rights. Suddenly, the financial equation changes. The cattle don't have to generate enormous profits. They simply need to help maintain the agricultural operation. The land does the heavy lifting, and this is the distinction most people miss. The ranch isn't necessarily a business designed to maximize annual income. It can be an asset designed to preserve and build wealth over decades.
The smartest ranch owners also ask a different question. Not how much money can my cattle make, but what else can this land produce? Maybe it's hunting. In strong hunting regions, landowners can lease access to deer, turkey, quail, or other game. Maybe it's hay. A productive meadow can produce surplus hay in good years, and that hay becomes extremely valuable when neighboring ranches are short. Maybe it's tourism. Americans will pay hundreds of dollars per night to experience the ranch lifestyle without actually having to live it. Cabins, horseback riding, cowboy experiences, fishing, hunting, outdoor meals. A ranch can become a hospitality business, and suddenly the same 5,000 acres aren't producing one revenue stream. They're producing several: cattle, hunting, hay, tourism, conservation, potential appreciation, tax advantages. That's when the economics start to make more sense, not because cattle suddenly became extraordinarily profitable, but because the land is being monetized in multiple ways.
So let's go back to that original image. The porch, the sunrise, the cattle moving across the horizon, the cowboy hat, the private lake, the freedom. The image isn't fake. The lifestyle is real. But behind that image is a business that can be brutally unforgiving. The fence still breaks, the pump still burns out, the hay bill still arrives, the cattle market still falls, the drought still comes, and the bank still wants its payment. So can a ranch make you rich? Yes, but here's the twist. It probably won't make you rich because you raised 500 cows. The cattle may barely cover the operating costs. The real wealth comes from owning productive land for a very long time, while keeping the operation alive and finding every possible way for that land to generate value. The cattle pay the privilege of owning the ranch. The land builds the wealth. That's the real economics. And it explains something that seems impossible from the outside. Why someone can operate a ranch for decades, make surprisingly little cash, and still become extremely wealthy. Because ranching isn't always a get-rich-quick business. It's a get-rich-slowly-if-you-can-survive business. The winners aren't necessarily the people with the biggest herds. They're the people who control costs, keep enough cash in reserve, diversify revenue, protect the land, survive droughts, survive market crashes, survive bad years without being forced to sell the asset. Because eventually, if you can hold the land long enough, the cattle may stop being the most important part of the story. The land becomes the story. And maybe that's the biggest misconception of all. You thought the rancher was getting rich from the cattle. He wasn't. He was getting rich from owning the horizon.